The night was cold, and the rain hit the roof of the outpost like small stones, making sharp tapping sounds that echoed across the silent hills of the empty world. The lights inside flickered, as Jack sat alone fixing a broken panel with tired hands and old tools. He had lived here for 3 years with no visitors and no real trouble, but that night felt different. The air felt heavy, like something unseen was watching. He stood up to stretch when he heard it, a soft knock on the airlock door. Not loud, but steady, like someone was too weak to hit harder. His heart jumped in his chest. There should be no one here, not for miles. He grabbed his old blaster just in case, and walked slowly to the door. The camera feed was blurry, but he could see a figure outside, small, thin, and shaking with the acid rain pouring down on her like fire. Without thinking too long, Jack unlocked the outer door and pulled the girl inside. She stumbled forward, landing hard on the metal floor. Her clothes were soaked and torn. Her skin was a soft blue color, with glowing marks along her arms. Her eyes were large and silver, with fear inside them. She tried to speak, but her lips only moved with no sound. She looked up at him with a weak smile, and Jack felt something twist inside his chest. She looked like a teenager, maybe not human but young and broken. Her arms hugged herself as her body shook from the cold. Jack looked around and ran to grab a towel. From the shelf he came back and knelt beside her, gently placing it over her shoulders. The moment the towel touched her, she froze. Her hands reached for it like it was a treasure. Her eyes grew wide as she looked at Jack, then looked at the towel, then looked at Jack again. Without warning, she knelt down and pressed her forehead to the floor at his feet, her shoulders shaking, not from the rain but from something else, something deeper. Jack took a step back, unsure of what just happened. He asked if she was hurt or needed food or rest, but she only whispered one word over and over, something he could not understand. She held the towel like it meant everything to her, like it was not just cloth, but something sacred. He reached for a translator device and turned it on, hoping it would catch her words. After a few minutes, the translator picked up her soft voice. She said the word again, and this time the device gave a meaning. She was saying thank you, but in a way that sounded like a prayer. Jack knelt down again and told her she was safe now, that she could rest and warm up, but the girl did not move from her kneeling place. He touched her arm gently, and she looked up, tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. She said something else. This time the translator gave a new phrase. Now, I belong to you. The words made Jack freeze. He looked at her confused and asked what she meant. She repeated it again. Now I belong to you. The translator might be broken, Jack thought, or maybe her language had strange meanings. Still, the way she looked at him with those wide silver eyes made him feel like something big had just happened. Something he did not understand. He helped her sit up, and she held the towel to her chest, like it was her heart. She tried to stand, but her legs gave out. Jack caught her and helped her to the cot in the corner. She was light like a bird, and her skin was cold to the touch. She spoke again, asking if he was her chosen one. Jack did not know how to answer that. He told her no, he was just someone who helped. Someone who gave her a towel because she looked cold and alone. But the girl smiled and said softly in broken words, the towel is the mark. The bond has been made now. You are the one. Her voice faded as sleep took her. Jack sat beside her, confused and a little scared, not of her, but of what this might mean. He looked at the towel in her hands and wondered what kind of world would treat a towel like a holy symbol. He checked her wounds. They were not deep, but the rain had burned parts of her skin. He cleaned them and wrapped them as best as he could. The girl stayed asleep, her chest rising slowly. With each breath, the rain outside grew louder, but inside it was quiet, peaceful. In a strange way, Jack sat back in his chair, staring at the girl. He thought about how she arrived, and why she was here, what had happened to her, and why she said she belonged to him. The towel still clutched in her arms, like it held her soul. Jack sighed and leaned back, not knowing that this small act of kindness would change everything, not knowing that faraway eyes had already seen what he had done, not knowing that someone was already coming for her, and now for him too. And outside, the rain kept falling on the lonely world. Jack did not sleep. That night, he sat beside the cot, watching the strange girl sleep with the towel still clutched in her arms, like it was made of gold. Her skin glowed faintly in the dim light, and her breathing was soft and slow. Outside, the storm had passed, but the strange feeling in the air remained, as if the world itself had changed. When morning came, the girl opened her eyes and sat up slowly. Her silver gaze met Jack's, and she smiled weakly, like she had dreamed of peace for the first time in years. She touched the towel gently, then placed it against her cheek, whispering soft words in her own language. Jack picked up the translator again, hoping to understand her better this time. She said her name was Vera, and that she came from a world called Valor, where the air was sweet, and the rivers sang in light. She spoke slowly with pauses, as if each word carried a heavy meaning. Jack listened closely, confused by many things, but unwilling to interrupt. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held pain. Vera said that on her planet, the towel was not just a cloth, it was a sacred offering used only in moments of deep trust. It was given only when one soul chose to protect another forever. When Jack had given her the towel he had unknowingly made a sacred bond in her culture, a bond that could not be undone without shame and punishment. Jack tried to explain that he did not know he was just helping someone in need, but Vera shook her head, gently saying that the bond was now part of her blood and her breath, and that she would follow him until her last breath, unless he broke the bond himself. He asked what that meant in real life, and she said she would live for him, serve him, fight for him, and even die for him. If needed, he stood in silence, not knowing what to say. She did not look like a soldier or a threat, but her words sounded like old laws, something built into her people from birth. Vera said she was born in a high family, trained in old ways, and raised under rules. Older than stars, she had run from home to escape being forced into a cruel union with a warrior she had never met. Jack began to understand more. Now she was not just a lost girl, she was someone who had risked everything for freedom, and now because of a simple towel she had bound herself to him forever. He tried again to explain that he did not want a servant or a follower. He was just a man living in a lonely outpost, fixing machines and drinking old coffee. Vera smiled and said that was why the bond mattered, because only someone who helped without asking for gain was worthy of the towel. She touched his hand gently and said she would protect him. Even if he never gave her a command, he felt a strange warmth in his chest, not fear, not confusion, but something closer to wonder. He asked if there was any way to undo the bond without hurting her, but her face turned sad, and she said only two paths remained: break the bond and cause her exile, or keep it and accept her loyalty. Jack was silent, thinking deeply. She stood and bowed her head, saying she would accept exile, if that was what he wanted, and she would leave before sunset. Before Jack could answer, an alarm rang through the station, a soft beep, followed by red lights blinking along the main wall. Jack rushed to the console and checked the radar. 3 unknown ships were heading toward the outpost, fast and silent, with no beacon or ID. Vera looked at the screen and her face turned pale. She whispered one word: bindbreakers. Jack turned to her and asked what they were. She said they were hunters, sent to find those who fled sacred bonds, and those who broke them. They were not here to talk, they were here to end what she had started, and anyone near her would be caught in it. Jack cursed under his breath and started locking doors and activating the shields. Vera stood calm, like a warrior waiting for the fight to begin. She asked for a weapon and a command. Jack stared at her, unsure, then asked what she meant. She said she could not act without the word of her bondkeeper, that she needed his permission to defend him. Her eyes looked sharp and steady, no longer weak, no longer scared. Jack looked at the towel still on the cot, and then looked back at her. He remembered how she had knelt in the rain, how she had trusted him without knowing who he was. He saw not just an alien girl, but someone who had been broken and was ready to rise again. He took a breath and spoke one word: go. Vera nodded, and her body seemed to change. She moved with speed and grace, grabbing a metal staff from the wall and flipping it into her hands. She stood at the airlock door like a shadow, waiting to strike. The radar beeped faster. The ships were landing close. Jack watched the screen as the dots touched down near the base. His heart pounded, his hands shook, and yet he felt ready. He had no idea what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure: the girl in the rain was not just a lost soul, she was fire waiting to burn, and now she had his word to rise. The ground shook as the first ship landed outside the outpost. Its engines burned the soil with a red glow, and the smoke rose like dark fog. Jack stood at the control panel, watching the radar lines flash and shift. Vera stood by the door, her staff glowing faint blue, her body calm like a statue, ready to strike. The second ship landed 10 seconds later, followed by the third, each one larger than the last, all dark gray and covered in strange markings that made Jack's skin crawl. Jack tried one more time to contact command, but the signal was gone, blocked or jammed. He looked at Vera, who said nothing, her eyes locked on the door. She told him they would not speak or listen. They had no need for talk. Their job was clear. They would take her back or leave her ashes behind, and Jack would be nothing more than a shadow in their report. He asked if they were soldiers. She said no. Worse, they were bond enforcers. They followed the old code with fire and steel. They hunted down oath and runaway bondmates, and their weapons were made to silence quickly, and without honor. They moved like ghosts, with one task and no mercy. Jack checked the outer cams. 3 figures stepped from the ships, tall, armored, and silent, their helmets shaped like skulls with burning red lines down the center. They walked without sound, moving in perfect steps across the rocky ground toward the outpost. One raised a hand, and a small orb floated into the air, spinning slowly above them, then flashing bright Before going dark, Vera's face grew pale, she said. The orb had scanned the building and locked on her scent. They would breach in less than 1 minute, unless they found no heat signs inside. Jack ran to shut down the heat cores, but Vera stopped him, saying it was too late. They had already marked her. Now they were coming fast and ready. He asked if they could escape. She shook her head and said running would only make it worse. They would track the ship and destroy it mid-air, unless she surrendered first. Jack looked at the old rifle on the wall and grabbed it, his hand shaking a little but his eyes firm. He said, they would not take her without a fight. Vera turned to him and said one word, speak it again, please. Jack knew what she meant. He nodded and said it again. Go, and with that, she moved faster than his eyes could follow her body. Slid across the floor and up the wall where she opened the upper hatch without making a sound. She slipped out into the morning air, disappearing into the thin mist. Jack stayed inside, rifle ready, heart pounding, as the first bang hit the door. Not a knock, but a test. Then, another stronger, this time followed by a hiss and a spark from the lock. Jack aimed at the door, waiting for it to fall, when suddenly, a loud crash came from above, and a scream not human echoed across the rocks. The second bang never came. The door stayed firm and silent. Jack ran to the camera screen and switched views. One of the skull helmets was down, body twisted. On the ground, a blur moved past the screen, and another figure staggered backward. Staff marks across the chest plate, then smoke and sparks as the power inside the suit failed. The third figure yelled something in a language the translator could not catch, but Vera's voice answered from above, sharp and full of fire. She said, this bond is mine now, and I will burn before I let you take it. Her voice shook the rocks, and for the first time Jack felt what true rage sounded like. Not wild, not loud, but calm and final. The last enforcer raised a long blade from his back and charged. Vera met him in the open, her staff spinning in wide circles, her steps light like wind on water. Jack watched in awe as she ducked and struck, danced and blocked. Each move planned, each hit clean. The blade missed her neck by inches, but she never slowed, never blinked. Then with one sharp twist, she broke the staff into 2 shorter blades and stepped forward, slashing the blade out of his hand and kicking him to the ground. He reached for a small detonator, but she crushed it with 1 foot and stood over him, breathing hard and fierce. She spoke again, and this time, Jack heard it clear: leave or fall. The enforcer rolled back to his feet and hissed a strange word, then ran toward his ship, dragging the other injured one with him. The third was already gone, left behind like a failed tool. The ships lifted slowly and flew off without light or sound, disappearing into the gray sky. Vera stood still for a moment, then looked back at Jack with tired eyes and walked back through the hatch, her body covered in cuts and her face pale but her step strong. Jack met her at the door and helped her down. Her hands were cold but firm, her grip light but real. He asked if she was all right. She nodded, then said, the first wave always tests the bond. If the keeper speaks and the servant fights, the code sees it as real. Now they would send others, stronger ones, smarter ones, ones who do not wait or test or talk. Jack said he would be ready. Vera smiled and said, now they must prepare together, and the bond must grow, not by law, but by choice. Outside, the wind picked up again, and the sky turned dark once more, but this time Jack did not feel alone, and the girl who once knelt in the rain now stood as his shield, with eyes that promised she would never fall while he still stood. Jack stood near the edge of the landing zone, the dust still settling from the retreat of the ships. His eyes followed Vera as she moved through the smoke, her body steady, her steps sure, but her face calm like nothing had happened. He had seen her fight with speed and strength that did not match her quiet nature. She was not just trained, she was something more, and now, he wanted answers. He asked how she learned to fight like that, but Vera only gave a small smile and said the bond gives purpose, and when the bond is real, it gives power to Jack. Did not fully understand, but he nodded, because he had seen it with his own eyes, the way she moved, the way she struck, the way the enemies fell before they even knew she was there. They returned inside the outpost and sealed the hatch behind them. Jack sat at the console and checked the radar again. Nothing yet, no new ships, no signals, no threats, but the silence felt heavier now, like it was hiding something, waiting to fall. Vera stood by the window, her eyes scanning the horizon, her hands still wrapped around the broken staff, like it was part of her soul. She told Jack that her people trained, the chosen from birth, the ones born with marks like hers, glowing under the skin. Those children were taken early and shaped by silence. Taught to move without sound, to strike without fear, to obey without question. They were the guardians of the old code, the protectors of sacred bonds, and the enforcers of law. But Vera had run away before the final binding, before her name was carved into the stone. Jack asked why she ran. She looked down and said the bond they had chosen for her was not true. It was arranged for control, not love or loyalty. She had seen what it did to others, how it broke them inside, and made them weapons, not people. She wanted freedom. She wanted to choose her path, even if it meant death. Jack listened, and said nothing. He could see the pain in her voice, even though she stood strong. He offered her a small meal from the supply pack, and she accepted with a thankful nod. They sat together in silence, eating slowly while the wind howled outside like a voice without shape. Vera finished her meal, and stood again asking Jack if he would let her prepare the base for what was to come. Jack asked what she meant, and she explained that the first strike was only a warning. The real ones would come next, not enforcers, but hunters, warriors, who lived only for the chase. They would not speak or test. They would come to kill and destroy, and they would not stop until the bond was broken by blood, or the threat was dead. He said she did not have to do this alone, but Vera turned and looked him in the eye, saying she would never leave him. Now the bond had grown stronger, and if he fell, she would fall too. Jack felt a strange mix of fear and pride. He was not a soldier, not a leader, but now he had someone willing to stand with him. Even when the sky turned dark, they worked through the night, setting traps along the hills, linking motion sensors to the defense grid, sealing weak spots in the outpost walls. Jack showed her the power nodes, and she showed him hidden fighting stances that made his movements quicker and cleaner. She trained him without harsh words, correcting his steps with soft hands and calm eyes. As they worked, Jack noticed how Vera changed when she moved through shadows. Her body melted into the dark. Like a wave, she did not just walk, she flowed each step, quiet each breath, measured, her skin glowing faint like stars beneath her clothes. She was not just trained, she was touched by something old and deep. Jack asked again if she was made for war, and she said no, she was made for duty, but she had chosen to break that shape, to become something new, to fight for what she believed, not what they forced on her. He asked what she believed in now, and she answered with one word, you. He did not know how to reply, so he just looked at her and nodded. Vera smiled and returned to her work, moving like the wind again, light and fast. Jack watched her, and wondered how many others like her had been lost in chains. How many had never known freedom or choice? How many had never met someone who gave them a towel without asking for anything back? The night passed, and the traps were set, the walls reinforced, the weapons charged and tested. Jack stood on the roof, looking at the stars, wondering which ones held danger, and which ones held hope. Beside him, Vera stood silent, her staff now glowing bright blue, her eyes sharp and ready. Then the silence broke. The radar beeped once, then twice, then flatlined. No signal, no ships, no data, just a blank screen. Vera looked up and whispered, "They are here." Jack asked where, and she pointed to the sky, saying, "They do not land like others, they fall." The stars above bent and twisted, as three shapes dropped like arrows wrapped in fire. No lights, no sound, only speed and death. Jack grabbed his rifle, and Vera took position at the front gate, her hands steady, her breath calm. The fight had come, and this time, there would be no warning, no mercy, no second chance. Jack looked at her one last time before the battle began, and said something he had never said before. Not a command, not an order, but a truth. "I believe in you." Vera smiled and stepped into the storm, her blades drawn, her heart steady, her eyes shining like fire, waiting to burn through the night. The sky ripped open as the hunters fell from above, not like ships, not like soldiers, but like weapons made of living fire. They hit the ground with thunder, sending rocks flying in all directions. Jack took cover behind the wall, heart-pounding rifle tight in his hands. Vera stood in the center of the field, blades glowing, skin lit with soft light, her body still as stone, waiting for the storm to strike. The first hunter landed near the east fence, tall and dark, with armor shaped like claws. No face, no eyes, only breath like steam from a deep furnace. It moved with silent steps, sharp and quick, heading straight for Vera. She did not move until it struck, then her body twisted low under its claws, her blades flashing across its side. Sparks flew as metal met energy. Her blade cut through the first layer of armor, but the hunter turned fast, hitting her in the chest and sending her sliding across the ground. Jack yelled her name and fired his rifle, but the shot bounced off the hunter like dust. Vera rolled back to her feet, her eyes glowing bright with rage. The second hunter landed behind her, and the third came down near the generator. Both moved in sync, surrounding her fast. Jack ran toward the control tower, trying to draw them away. He activated the outer defense grid, but the system showed red. Offline, hacked or jammed. They had prepared for this. Too smart, too fast, too deadly. Vera did not run. She dashed forward, slashing low at one and high at the other. Her body moved faster than his eyes could follow. The sound of metal breaking filled the air. One hunter dropped its arm, useless, and Vera leaped, spinning her blades and striking again and again until it fell to the ground, sparking and still. The third hunter reached the generator and stabbed into it with long fingers. draining the power lines in seconds. The lights dimmed, the alarms died. The base now blind and silent, Jack turned to fire again, but the second hunter was there, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him into the air. He gasped, struggling to breathe, his rifle falling from his hands. The hunter growled a word in a language he could not understand, but the meaning was clear: surrender or die. Vera screamed from across the field and charged, her body glowing now like fire itself. She hit the hunter with full force, blades cutting deep into its side. The hunter dropped. Jack turned to fight, but she was already behind it, slicing through the backplate and driving her blade through the core. It dropped, shaking, and fell. Jack coughed and grabbed his throat, trying to stand. The last hunter now ran toward Vera, full speed, claws ready, eyes burning. She waited for it, her face calm, her breath slow, and then, just as it jumped, she moved under it and drove her blade straight through its chest. Both fell to the ground, and the world grew quiet again, only the sound of crackling wires and Jack's breath filling the night. He ran to her, calling her name. She lay still, her body covered in cuts, her glow fading fast. He dropped beside her and held her in his arms, saying, "Stay awake, stay with me." She opened her eyes, barely, and smiled weakly, saying one word: alive. Jack carried her inside and placed her on the cot. He cleaned her wounds and wrapped them with what he had left in the kit. She said nothing but watched him, her fingers never letting go of his sleeve. Like she feared he would vanish, he whispered to her, saying she was safe, that he would protect her no matter what. Vera looked at him and said, "You spoke the bond. You gave me the word, and then you believed in me. Now they will never stop. They will send more, and not just hunters. They will send judges, and fire, and ships, with voices that command planets. You must release the bond, or they will take your world." Jack shook his head, and said, "No, this bond is mine now. I did not mean to make it, but I will not break it. I will not let them take you." She looked at him like she had never seen him before, and then she said, "Then you are mine, and I am yours." Suddenly, the old console flashed a message, pulsing in red, not from the radar, not from Earth, but from space itself, a galactic broadcast in many languages. Flashing one line across the screen: "A human has taken the bond of Virilani, heir of Thaler. All systems prepare for judgment." Jack stared at the screen and then looked at Vera, saying, "You said you ran from a union. You never told me you were the heir." She turned her head away and said, "I did not want you to treat me like them. I wanted you to see me as I am." Jack sat down beside her, thinking about everything he had just seen, everything he had heard. He had fought machines before, he had built towers from scrap, he had lived alone for years, but nothing had ever felt this real, this heavy, this alive. He said softly then, "I will see you not as a royal, not as a weapon, but as the girl who held the towel like a treasure, and smiled when the storm passed." Vera smiled again, and closed her eyes, whispering one last thing before sleep. "I am safe with you outside." The stars burned brighter than ever, and somewhere in the dark sky more ships began to move, pulled by law, pulled by fire, pulled by a promise, a human never meant to make, but now would never break. The night sky burned with light, as the warning from the stars echoed across the screen. Jack stood frozen as the red words repeated again and again: "A human has claimed the heir of Thaler. The judgment is coming." Vera tried to sit up, but her body shook from the fight, her wounds still fresh, her breath weak but steady. Jack rushed to her side, helping her stand while his mind raced through every possible way out. He looked at the radar again, and saw new signals blinking fast coming from the edge of the system. They were larger than anything he had seen before. They were not scouts or hunters. They were warships moving in formation, silent and cold, like giants made of steel and flame. Jack turned to Vera and said, "We cannot stay. They will burn this place down with us in it." Vera nodded and said, "We must reach the old escape bay near the cliffs. There is a scout ship buried beneath the rocks. I saw it when I landed. I did not think we would need it, but now it is our only hope." Jack helped her gather supplies while the power flickered around them. He packed food, weapons, and the last working medkit, while Vera limped toward the main hatch, gripping her broken staff for support. They stepped into the open air, and the wind struck their faces like a warning. The sky above was full of shadows, now blinking lights and long ships slowly circling like vultures, waiting to drop fire. Jack led the way through the narrow trail that twisted behind the outpost. The rocks were sharp and the path tight, but Vera knew the way, guiding him with quiet words, even though every step seemed to steal her strength. Suddenly, the air split open, and a blast of heat slammed into the trail behind them. One of the warships had fired a warning shot, sending dust and flame into the air. Jack pulled Vera down and shielded her with his body, while more blasts lit up the night. One struck the outpost in the distance, and it vanished in a wave of fire and smoke, the only home Jack had known for years, now gone in seconds. They kept moving, breath by breath, step by step, until they reached the edge of the cliff. Below them was a pile of rock and metal shaped like a broken wing, the old scout ship, half buried, but still whole. Jack climbed down and started clearing the rubble with his hands, while Vera watched the sky, her eyes locked on the falling lights above. Jack pried opened the side hatch and climbed inside. The air was stale, but the power core still hummed with a faint glow. He called Vera in and helped her sit near the console, then rushed to the pilot seat and began linking his old wrist panel to the ship's system. The codes were different, but not impossible. He worked fast, fingers moving like fire, while alarms sounded outside, counting down to full strike. Vera touched the wall of the ship and whispered words in her native tongue. The lights grew stronger, as if the ship heard her voice and responded. Jack smiled and said, "Talk to it more, maybe. It will love you enough to fly." She gave a soft laugh, even in pain, and said it was part of her family's fleet, long forgotten now, a relic like her. The engine roared to life as the systems came online. Jack pulled the levers, and the ship shook, rising slowly from the rocks. Another blast hit the cliffs nearby, throwing debris against the hull, but the ship held steady, lifting into the air as the flames chased them from below. Vera closed her eyes and whispered again, and the ship pushed harder, breaking through the smoke and reaching the sky. The warships saw them and turned their weapons, but Vera raised her hand and spoke a single word. The ship spun fast, dropping counter signals and decoys that confused the enemy scans. Jack followed her lead and flew through the narrowest gaps, using the clouds and the shadows of moons to hide. The little ship danced through death like a spark on the wind. Hours passed before they reached the edge of the system. The warships gave up the chase, stopped by something old and unseen. Vera said the stars had spoken, and their laws held even the hunters back. For now, Jack did not ask what that meant. He only watched as the stars faded behind them, and silence returned inside the ship. Vera sat in the co-pilot seat, her face pale, her body tired, but her eyes still strong. She looked at Jack and said, "You saved me again." He shook his head and said, "You saved us both." She reached out and placed her hand on his and said softly, "I believe in the bond now, not because of law, but because of you." Jack looked at her and felt something shift inside. Not fear, not duty, but something warm and deep, like trust, built in battle, like hope, born in fire. He squeezed her hand and said then, "Let us choose what happens next. Not the stars, not the empires, not the laws, just us." The ship drifted through quiet space, moving toward a new world, unknown and unseen, but full of promise, and as they flew, the bond between them no longer felt like a mistake. It felt like something real, something earned, something strong enough to face whatever came next. Together in the silence of the stars. The stars outside the small scout ship moved slowly like quiet watchers. In the dark, their light cold but steady. As Jack stared through the main screen, his hands still on the controls, his heart still racing from the escape. Vera sat beside him, wrapped in a soft blanket, her wounds healing slowly, her eyes open, but far away, as if seeing a place Jack could not reach. The silence between them was not empty, it was full of questions, full of choices, full of things that would never be the same. They had made it out of the system just before the strike came. The warships turned back as if held by some invisible, while Vera had whispered something in her language, and the ships had stopped frozen, as if touched by something ancient. Jack had seen many strange things in space, but nothing like that. No warning, no reason, just obedience to a word. Now they drifted, far from danger, but not from consequence. Jack turned to Vera and asked her what really happened back there. She took a breath and said, "The warships are bound by laws older than the stars, and when I spoke the ancient word, I claimed a right forgotten by most. Only the blood of the royal line can speak it and be heard, and I spoke it in your name." Jack blinked, confused, and said, "In my name? What does that mean?" Vera looked at him with steady eyes and said, "It means you are no longer just a man. You are now a chosen bondmate to the heir of Thaler, by the will of the stars, by the voice of the old code. You have been seen, and you have been marked." Jack laughed, but the sound felt hollow. He said, "I never asked for this, I never wanted this. I gave you a towel because you were cold." Vera smiled gently and said, "And that kindness has more power than fire, more weight than law in my world. You offered help without reward, and in doing so, you became something greater than a king." They flew in silence. For a while, the ship humming softly like a sleeping beast. Jack stared at the stars, wondering what came next. Would more hunters follow? Would the bond be challenged again? Would the galaxy ever let a human and an alien stand as one? Vera broke the silence and said, "We must go to the circle of judgment. Only there can the bond be witnessed. Only there can we speak our truth." Jack asked where it was, and she pointed to the map, showing a system far from Earth, a place wrapped in clouds and legend. A world where the old voices still held power. He nodded, and turned the ship toward it, his path now clear, even if the road ahead was not. The journey took 2 days, and in that time Jack and Vera talked about small things, about stars and music, and the strange ways of both humans and Thalerans. They laughed once, maybe twice, and shared meals in quiet peace sometimes. Jack caught her looking at him, not with fear or duty, but with something softer, something real. When they arrived, the planet was covered in silver clouds shaped like rivers flowing in slow motion. The Circle of Judgment was not a building, but a valley wide and deep with stones that glowed from within. Voices rose as they landed, figures in robes, with masks of light, waiting in silence as Jack and Vera stepped from the ship. Vera walked first, her body straight, her steps strong, even with pain still in her bones. Jack followed, unsure but steady. The robed ones parted to form a circle, and Vera stepped into it, then turned and held out her hand to Jack. He took it and entered the circle. The stones around them began to hum with soft sound. A voice rose, not from a person but from the ground, from the sky, from the stars. It asked one question, spoken in all tongues: do you stand by the bond made in fire, sealed in blood, held by choice? Jack looked at Vera, then stepped forward and said, I do not because I must, but because I choose to. The light grew brighter, the stones sang louder, and the masked figures bowed slowly. Vera turned to Jack and said, the code has heard you, the stars have seen you. Now we are not hunted, now we are whole. The sky above them opened and light poured down, not warm, not cold, but clean like truth. When they returned to the ship, Jack felt different, not more or less, but clear, like a door had opened and he had stepped through. Vera sat beside him, her hand in his, her eyes full of peace. He asked, what now? And she said, now we build a life, not as heir and bondmate, not as protector and warrior, but as two souls who chose each other when no one else believed. The ship rose once more, leaving the valley behind the stars, welcoming them back, not as strangers, but as something new, something strong. The galaxy had feared the bond, because it was honest, because it was born from kindness, not control. And now that bond had been seen by the stars, it could not be undone. Jack and Vera flew together into the unknown, not running, not hiding, but free at last, and stronger than ever, with nothing left to fear except the moment they would have to choose which world to call home.